Growing up, I was never just a kid. I was the fat kid. Before I even had a chance to figure out who I was, my size had already defined me for everyone else. While the other kids in kindergarten were showing off their drawings and giggling over finger paint, I was already the punchline. I didn't understand it at the time, but the way people looked at me made it clear. I didn't belong. By the time I hit middle school, the teasing became routine. Some kids were cruel with their words, calling me names like blimp or cow, while others were cruel with silence, making sure to never sit near me, never invite me to parties, never even make eye contact. It wasn't just at school. The bullying followed me everywhere. The gym, the cafeteria, even walking home. I became painfully aware of every inch of my body, of every step I took. I walked hunched, trying to be smaller, quieter, less seen. High school wasn't any better. In fact, it was worse. The jabs turned sharper, more adult, more personal. No guy will ever date her. She probably eats her feelings. Imagine being her size and still wearing that. Those weren't just words, they were knives, and every single one left a mark. At home, I hoped for refuge. But that's not what I found. My sister Bonnie was only a year younger than me, but we couldn't have been more different. She was slim, vibrant, magnetic, the kind of girl who walked into a room and instantly had everyone's attention. She was the type of person people wanted to be around, easy to talk to, easy to like. Bonnie didn't just survive high school, she dominated it. Cheer squad, honor roll, homecoming court, you name it, she did it. Meanwhile, I was in the back row of the library, hidden behind books that didn't judge me. I loved Bonnie, I really did. I looked out for her like an older sister should. When we were younger, I used to help her braid her hair and walk her to class. But as we grew older and more people started noticing the differences between us, she began noticing them too. And that's when everything changed. By the time we were both in high school, Bonnie stopped acknowledging me in the hallways. She'd walk past me with her friends like I was a stranger. Worse, sometimes they'd whisper and laugh, and I knew I was the joke. There were times I'd be in the cafeteria trying to eat alone in peace, and they'd accidentally bump my tray or drop comments like, "Do you really need that cookie?" I started to dread lunch more than any class. At home, it didn't stop. Bonnie's friends would come over and treat my room like an exhibit. They'd burst in uninvited, point at me, laugh at my body, and hurl words like gross and fatty. I begged my parents to say something, to make it stop, but every time I spoke up, they'd chuckle and brush it off. "Come on, that's just how siblings play," they'd say. Or worse, "Bonnie doesn't mean it. You're too sensitive." Too sensitive, that was always the excuse. But how could I not be? When you're constantly reminded that your body makes you less worthy, less lovable, eventually, you start to believe it. I spent years thinking I was the problem, that if I could just shrink myself, people would finally see me, finally love me. But I wasn't just invisible to my peers, I was invisible to my own family. And I didn't know it yet, but one day, that invisibility would shatter. Bonnie and I used to be close. Before the world convinced her I wasn't worth standing next to, before high school popularity became currency and appearances determined status, Bonnie used to crawl into my bed at night when she had nightmares. She used to grip my hand when we crossed the street and beg me to wait for her at the school gates. I was her big sister, and for a while, that title meant something. But by the time we hit high school, it was like a switch had flipped. Bonnie had blossomed overnight. Confident, beautiful, magnetic. I stayed the same. Awkward, bookish, invisible. I tried not to resent the shift. I told myself it was normal, that siblings grow apart, but it didn't feel like drifting. It felt like being discarded. At school, Bonnie began treating me like a stranger. Worse, an embarrassment. If we crossed paths in the hallway, she wouldn't look at me. If I dared to wave, she'd pretend not to see. But the part that stung the most was how her friends, girls who used to come over for sleepovers, eat dinner at our house, braid my hair, had now joined in on mocking me. And Bonnie never stopped them. It was subtle at first. Eye rolls, whispers behind hands, laughs when I dropped something in the cafeteria. But it escalated. Once I was carrying a lunch tray when one of her friends stuck out her foot and tripped me. I crashed to the floor, salad dressing in my hair, milk splattered across my shirt. The entire lunchroom roared. Bonnie didn't help me. She laughed. That day, something inside me cracked. I didn't cry in front of them. I waited until I got home, locked myself in the bathroom, and sobbed into a towel until my chest ached. When I told my parents, hoping they'd finally see what I was going through, they brushed it off again. Siblings tease. It's how they bond, my mom said, as if public humiliation was some rite of passage. It wasn't bonding, it was betrayal. At home, the cruelty continued. Bonnie and her friends would barge into my room without knocking, throw my stuffed animals on the floor, point at my body, and laugh. "God, you still sleep with these?" they'd say, holding up my old teddy bear like it was something filthy. "You really are a baby." The worst part? I started to believe them. I began avoiding the living room when Bonnie had guests. I skipped family dinners when I could. I stayed in my room, headphones on, volume up, trying to drown out the laughter, the shame. Even in my own home, I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel seen. The only time my parents seemed to notice me was when I brought home perfect grades, straight A's, honor roll, academic awards. Those moments were the only ones where I felt like I mattered. My mom would brag about me to relatives as if I were her little genius, but it always came with a backhanded tone, like my intelligence was some form of compensation. "She's not outgoing like Bonnie, but at least she's smart." I clung to school like a lifeline. It was the one area of my life where I felt in control, where I didn't have to rely on looks or charisma or social standing. I just had to work hard, and I did. But Bonnie hated the attention I got for my grades. She didn't say it outright, but I saw it in her eyes every time my parents praised me. One night, just before a big project was due, I woke up to find my homework missing. My notes, printed pages, everything, gone. I tore my room apart in a panic, and there she was, standing in the hallway, smirking. Years later, she admitted it. Drunk, careless. "You were just so smug about your grades. I had to bring you down a notch." I think that moment sealed the distance between us, not because she'd sabotaged me, but because I realized she'd never really seen me as her sister. I was just a threat to her spotlight. And now, years later, she wanted me to stand beside her at her wedding. The sister who once tripped me in the cafeteria now expected me to wear matching colors and smile for pictures like nothing ever happened. When I left home that summer, something inside me snapped. I boarded the flight back to Chicago with my chest tight and my mind racing. The lunch with my family had been a disaster. Bonnie's engagement was supposed to be a moment of joy, of celebration. Instead, she mocked me, right in front of our parents, reducing everything I had achieved in life to the number on a bathroom scale. Then, like salt on a wound, my parents joined in, clapping for Bonnie's engagement while dissecting my body like I was some failed science project. For the first time in years, I felt 16 again, awkward, ashamed, invisible, and furious. When I landed back at my apartment, I stared at myself in the mirror for a long time, not with hatred, not with regret, but with a strange simmering resolve. I didn't need to lose weight for Bonnie's wedding. I needed to reclaim something for myself. It started slowly. I cleaned out my fridge and tossed every leftover takeout container. I dusted off the gym shoes I hadn't touched in months. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my coworkers. This wasn't a crash diet or a wedding transformation montage. It was something deeper, more personal. I was tired of being talked about like I wasn't in the room. Within a week, I joined a small women-focused gym a few blocks away. My first session with my personal trainer, Janelle, left me aching in places I didn't know could hurt. But she looked me in the eye and said something that stuck. "You're not fixing yourself. You're fighting for yourself." I clung to those words like a lifeline. Every morning before work, I was there, sweating, struggling, pushing past the doubt. Janelle had once lost 100 pounds herself, and when I broke down crying on the mats after a bad day, she sat beside me and said, "They don't get to write your story anymore." My eating changed. My mindset changed. And slowly, my body did too. Over the months, the weight came off. Inch by inch, pound by pound, I shed more than just size. I shed years of shame, of silence, of trying to make myself smaller just to fit into other people's comfort zones. Clothes started to fit differently. Strangers held doors open. Men at the coffee shop started saying good morning. At work, I got compliments like, "You're glowing lately," or "You look like you're standing taller." But what changed most wasn't how others saw me. It was how I saw myself. I bought my first form-fitting dress. I dyed my hair blonde, a warm honey shade my stylist said would complement my skin tone. I started walking with my head up, not because I thought I was better, but because for the first time in my life, I believed I was enough, and that belief was earned, not handed to me. Then, just 2 weeks before Bonnie's wedding, I got a group text from my family. "Lunch next Saturday to finalize the wedding plans. We can't wait to see you." A pit formed in my stomach. My hands trembled. They hadn't seen me since the summer. They had no idea how much I had changed, not just on the outside, but within. A part of me wanted to skip it, to avoid the judgment, the snide remarks, the passive-aggressive digs. But another part of me, the part that had run miles, lifted weights, and cried on the floor of a gym, was ready. I wasn't going back to prove something. I was going back because I didn't have to prove anything anymore. I showed up to the lunch wearing a sky blue wrap dress that hugged my waist and showed off the curve of my collarbone. My hair was freshly styled, falling in soft waves past my shoulders. I wore just enough makeup to feel confident, not hidden. I looked good, not because I wanted to upstage anyone, but because for once, I wanted to walk into a room and feel proud to take up space. When I stepped into my parents' house, the room went silent. My mother dropped the salad tongs she was holding. My dad blinked like I had materialized out of thin air. Bonnie's fiancé stammered a polite hello, visibly confused. I could see it in their eyes. They were all trying to compute what they were seeing. I wasn't the overweight, forgettable sister anymore. I was radiant. Bonnie hadn't noticed me right away. She was busy checking her phone, sitting with one leg crossed over the other like she owned the place. But when I said, "Hey, Bonnie," and stood in front of her, she froze. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe. I saw the exact moment her smile twitched into something less genuine. She stood, touched my arm awkwardly, then poked my stomach and said, half laughing, "Wait, is this really you?" My parents chuckled like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. I gave her a calm smile. "Yeah, still me, just a version that doesn't let people walk all over her anymore." We sat down for lunch, but the vibe was off. I could feel it, like I was disrupting some long-established dynamic. My dad kept complimenting me in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. "Wow, you actually look healthy now." Or, "I guess that trainer did something right." Bonnie barely touched her food. She just kept glancing over, like she couldn't quite believe I was real. And then she dropped the first bomb. "I mean, I told you to lose weight," she said, twirling her fork. "But I didn't think you'd go this far." This far? I wanted to laugh, as if taking care of my own body and finding my confidence was somehow crossing a line. "Funny," I replied. "It's almost like I was never supposed to feel good about myself. Only manageable." That's when my mom chimed in with a line I'll never forget. "Well, sweetie," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder, "you look amazing, but maybe tone down the blonde hair a bit? You're starting to outshine the bride." Silence. Even Bonnie looked stunned, though I couldn't tell if it was from the comment or the fact that it might be true. "I didn't dye my hair to outshine anyone," I said evenly. "I did it because I liked it, and I didn't lose weight for this wedding. I did it for me." Bonnie's face tightened. My dad tried to break the tension with a joke. "Well, let's just make sure nobody confuses who the bride is at the altar, huh?" I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I just smiled. "I don't think anyone would make that mistake," I said quietly. "Bonnie's made sure she's the center of attention since we were kids." The room went cold. She pushed her chair back and stood. "You're ruining this," she snapped. "Why couldn't you just show up like you used to, fat and quiet?" And there it was, the real fear. Not that I'd changed too much, but that I'd changed at all. That I'd stopped playing the role they wrote for me. And suddenly I understood. They weren't mad because I looked good. They were mad because I had finally learned how to feel good. After Bonnie's outburst, a suffocating silence fell over the room. It wasn't just awkward, it was heavy, like the air itself had turned against me. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears as she stood there, fists clenched, her eyes flashing with something that went far beyond simple jealousy. "You're ruining this," she repeated, her voice trembling now. This was supposed to be about me. I took a breath, trying to steady myself. I didn't show up to steal anything from you, Bonnie. I came because I thought maybe, for once, you could just be happy for me too. She scoffed. Happy for you? You've never even tried to be part of this family. That was the moment my mom chimed in, her tone sharp, as if she'd been waiting for a cue. Enough, she snapped, her eyes drilling into me. You knew what this lunch was about. We invited you here to help finalize Bonnie's wedding plans, not to parade around like some fitness influencer. Her words stung harder than I expected. It wasn't the insult, it was the dismissal. Like everything I'd done, every painful mile on the treadmill, every moment I'd fought through tears and self-doubt, didn't mean a thing if it didn't fit their idea of who I should be. My dad, ever the peacemaker on the surface but never truly on my side, muttered, "Let's just focus on the wedding. We don't need any more drama." Drama. That's what they thought I was. I looked at the three of them, my mother, father, and sister, and realized they didn't want me to feel better about myself. They wanted the version of me they could control, the one who didn't speak up, the one who didn't dress confidently or draw attention, the one who knew her place, the one who made them look better by comparison. I stood slowly, my chair scraping softly against the hardwood floor. I'm not here to be the backdrop to Bonnie's spotlight, I said, my voice calm but firm. And I'm definitely not here to shrink myself to make any of you feel more comfortable. My mom rolled her eyes. There she goes again, always playing the victim. I blinked, stunned. Victim? I've spent most of my life apologizing for existing, for being too fat, too quiet, too different, for not being the daughter you could show off like Bonnie. I'm not playing anything, I'm just done. Bonnie crossed her arms. You're just bitter because you're still single, and you think weight loss makes you better than everyone. I shook my head. No, Bonnie, I don't think I'm better. I just finally stopped thinking I was worse. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was revealing. I realized they weren't shocked by what I'd said. They were shocked I had the nerve to say it. I grabbed my purse and headed toward the door. As I opened it, I heard my dad mutter, "Unbelievable." I turned one last time and said, "You're right, it is unbelievable that it took me this long to finally see the truth." And I walked out. I didn't look back, I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because this pain was familiar. It had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. For the first time in my life, I chose me. And that felt better than any approval they could have ever given. When I walked out of my parents' house that day, I didn't go home right away. I drove aimlessly through the winding roads of my old neighborhood, watching the sun dip lower behind the hills. My fingers were tight around the steering wheel, knuckles pale. I wasn't angry anymore. I was exhausted, emotionally wrung out like a wet rag. I ended up at a quiet park I used to visit as a teenager, back when I'd bring my books there to escape the noise of home. The bench near the fountain was still there, chipped and weathered by time, but familiar. I sat down and finally let the tears fall. They weren't dramatic, sobbing tears. They were quiet, heavy drops of sadness slipping down my face like the final release of years I'd spent bottling everything inside. I thought about how far I'd come, about how I used to dream of moments like that family lunch, coming back home, transformed, strong, proud. I imagined they would embrace the new me, see the pain I'd survived and say, "We're sorry, we see you now." But they didn't. They only saw the threat. The next day, my phone lit up with messages from Bonnie. "I hope you're happy. You ruined everything. You couldn't just let me have one moment without making it about yourself. Don't bother showing up to the wedding." Her words stung, but not for the reasons she probably intended. What cut deep wasn't her anger. It was her expectation that I'd feel guilty, that I'd cave. My mother followed soon after with a series of passive-aggressive texts about how disappointed she was, how family means showing up, and why I had to make everything harder than it needed to be. But I didn't reply. I refused to break that silence, not this time. Instead, I booked a one-way flight back to my city 2 days early. I needed space, physical and emotional. Back in my own apartment, I felt a strange wave of peace. The silence wasn't suffocating, it was mine. No judgment lurking in the corners, no voices whispering that I wasn't enough. That week, I went back to the gym, back to work, back to the version of me I had built with intention and love. But something shifted. For the first time, I didn't work out to prove anything to them. I wasn't chasing some twisted form of acceptance anymore. I had found something deeper, self-respect, and as I ran on the treadmill, sweat soaking through my shirt, I looked at my reflection in the mirror and whispered, "You don't need their love to be worthy." It was a small sentence, but it broke the last invisible chain still wrapped around my chest. I decided then and there that I wouldn't go to Bonnie's wedding, not out of spite, but because I deserved peace. I didn't owe her a public performance. I didn't owe my parents another chance to minimize me in the background of someone else's celebration. I owed myself the kindness I'd been so desperate to receive from others, so I made a plan. Instead of attending the wedding, I booked a weekend at a spa resort 2 hours outside the city. Just me, fresh air, and the kind of silence that heals. I turned off my phone. I ordered room service. I lay in a hammock reading books that once gave me comfort in my loneliest moments. And for once, I didn't feel alone. I felt free. Bonnie's wedding day came and went, and I wasn't there. While they posed for smiling pictures under white canopies, I was tucked into a plush robe in a mountainside spa, sipping herbal tea by a fire pit and watching the sunrise over pine-covered hills. It should have been bittersweet. I had spent most of my life aching to be included, to be accepted by the people who were supposed to love me without conditions. But strangely, I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. I thought I might cry that day, but I didn't. Instead, I laughed, softly, quietly, like a weight had lifted from my chest. Back at the resort, I turned off my phone, letting the messages pile up unread. I didn't need to read them. I already knew what they'd say. Accusations, guilt-tripping, claims that I was selfish for putting myself first for once. But for the first time, I didn't care. I wasn't being selfish. I was healing. That weekend was a turning point. I realized I didn't need to keep earning my family's love like some badge of honor. Love, true love, doesn't come with prerequisites or dress sizes or hairstyles or carefully orchestrated performances. It comes with presence, respect, and understanding, none of which they ever offered me. By Monday morning, I returned home to a flood of texts and voicemails from my parents and Bonnie. My mother called me disrespectful. My father accused me of embarrassing the family. Bonnie's messages were venom-laced, accusing me of trying to steal her moment by not showing up and making everyone talk. It was almost laughable how they twisted my absence into a ploy for attention. "People noticed you weren't there," Bonnie wrote. "You humiliated me. You made it about you. Again." She didn't say she missed me. She didn't ask if I was okay, she just raged. I deleted the messages, all of them. I didn't even flinch. But then something unexpected happened. A few days after the wedding, my cousin Emily called. She had been at the reception and said she couldn't stop thinking about how uncomfortable everything felt without me there. "I've never seen them so tense," she said. "It was like the air had changed." I stayed silent. Then she added, "I just want you to know. I see you, and I'm proud of you." That simple sentence broke something open in me. For so long, I thought I was alone. I believed no one in the family noticed the cruelty I endured or the way I was always pushed into the shadows. But they did, maybe not all, but some. And that mattered more than I could put into words. Emily and I talked for an hour that night. We laughed, we shared stories. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I realized something vital. I wasn't the broken one. I was the brave one, the one who dared to step away, the one who, despite everything, still built a life. Bonnie's wedding may have been her big day, but that weekend, that was my rebirth, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. When I skipped Bonnie's wedding, I expected chaos, and I got it. The day of her wedding passed in silence for me. No phone calls, no angry texts. I spent it wrapped in a plush hotel robe at a luxury resort miles away, sipping iced tea by the pool and listening to soft jazz through my earbuds. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't being told to shrink myself, physically or emotionally. I wasn't trying to appease anyone. I was just still. But peace has a funny way of stirring the hornet's nest. The next day, my phone lit up with a flood of messages from my parents and Bonnie. Not one of them asked if I was okay or where I had gone. Every message was about them, their embarrassment, the relatives who asked about my absence, the photos I wasn't in, the whispers among guests. People asked where you were all night, Bonnie wrote, and I had to lie and say you were sick. Sick, that word stung. I wasn't sick. I was tired. Tired of pretending I was okay with being treated like a footnote in their perfect little family narrative. My mother's text was worse. Your absence ruined the family portraits. You should have just shown up, smiled, and done your part. Bonnie was heartbroken. You've always been the selfish one. The selfish one? Was it selfish to want to be treated with kindness? To be respected? All I had done was finally say no, and that single act of self-preservation had flipped their world upside down. Later that week, my cousin Rachel called me. She had attended the wedding and could sense something was off. I hadn't seen her since we were kids, but we reconnected quickly. She told me the family was in shambles. Apparently, some guests had commented openly about how stunning I look now and asked why I wasn't in the bridal party. That's when things got awkward. My absence had made people talk, and in my family, appearances mean everything. Bonnie ended up crying in the bathroom during the reception, not because I wasn't there, but because people noticed I wasn't there. I won't lie and say I felt good about it. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, because deep down I had wanted them to say, "We're sorry, we see you now." But they never did. They just missed the optics, not the relationship. And yet something changed for me in that silence. Rachel and I kept talking. She told me things I'd never known, how she'd also felt alienated growing up, how she'd seen through the favoritism in our family but was too afraid to say anything. She apologized for not standing up for me back then. That one conversation meant more to me than anything my immediate family had ever said. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't wrong for wanting better. Since that call, Rachel and I have stayed in touch. We text almost every day. I've been invited to spend Thanksgiving with her side of the family this year. No pressure to look a certain way. No lectures, just warmth. My family still hasn't apologized. They probably never will, but I've stopped waiting. I'm no longer a silent participant in their dysfunction. I've started building something new, something that doesn't require me to shrink. And it turns out, when you stop chasing the approval of people who never appreciated you, you make space for the ones who will. After skipping Bonnie's wedding and retreating into my own space, something remarkable happened. I finally began to feel free. For the first time in what felt like decades, I wasn't bending myself into a shape someone else wanted me to be. I wasn't counting calories for a wedding I didn't care about. I wasn't trying to win the approval of people who only valued me when I was silent, smaller, invisible. I had finally learned to choose me. The resort stay turned out to be more than just a getaway. It was healing. I spent my mornings walking barefoot on the beach, letting the ocean breeze wash over me like a reset button for my soul. I journaled, read books that reminded me of my worth, and spent long afternoons by the pool, soaking in sunlight I didn't have to earn. I was no longer the fat, invisible sister they used to mock. I was a woman who had fought her way back to herself and won. But of course, the silence from my family didn't last. 2 days after Bonnie's wedding, I received an email. No subject line, just her name. Inside was a single line. "Thanks for making my day about you. You ruined everything. That was it. No context, no apology, just more blame." It took everything in me not to respond, but I didn't. I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and reminded myself that I didn't owe her anything. Not after years of ridicule, sabotage, and fake sisterhood. Then came my parents. Voicemails, dozens. My mom's voice was dripping in that familiar tone, half guilt, half manipulation. "We just don't understand what's gotten into you. All that weight loss, all that confidence, it's like you're turning into someone we don't recognize. What happened to our sweet, humble girl?" I nearly laughed. Sweet and humble? What they meant was compliant and self-silencing. The girl they could mold, humiliate, ignore, and she'd still come back asking for scraps of affection. That girl was gone. Still, a part of me mourned. Not for them, but for the idea of family I had held onto for so long. I wanted to believe we could fix it, that they'd see me now and finally appreciate my worth beyond the scale or my relationship status. But they didn't, and they probably never would. So I started to build something new. I began therapy sessions again, this time with a focus on family trauma. I reconnected with a few childhood friends who had always been kind but I'd pushed away in shame. I even started writing a blog, just small posts about body image, healing, and reclaiming your narrative when your family refuses to see your truth. The messages I got from strangers brought me to tears. I wasn't alone. None of us were. As the weeks passed, I stopped checking for texts. I muted the family group chat. I stopped letting their words echo in my head like gospel. I created new rituals, Sunday dinners with friends who made me laugh so hard my stomach ached, morning walks without counting steps, grocery shopping without shame. I'd lived so long waiting for someone to clap for me, to say, "You've done enough, you're good enough." And now I could finally say it to myself. I may not have walked down the aisle in a fancy dress with people applauding me like Bonnie, but I had finally stood tall in my own skin on my own terms. That was my celebration. And I didn't need a wedding to make it matter.